Hey book nerds, welcome to my channel. So another month is over. I'm very scared as to how fast this year is going. But that means it's time for another end of month wrap up. So June was a really good reading for month for me actually. I ended up reading 18 books, which is insane. And I had a lot of really good reads. So I already did a mid-month wrap-up, which I'll link down below, and I also did a wrap-up for Buzzwordathon. So this is just the last half of the books of the month that I'm talking about now, because my wrap-ups are always insanely long. So, in total for the month, I read one 1-star book, one 2-star book, one 3-star book, two 3.5-star books, four 4-star books, three 4.5-star books, and four 5-star books, which is what I mean about it being a great reading month, because I basically never gave 5 stars and I gave 4 out this month. I think part of the reason that I had such a good reading month is that I incorporated audiobooks into my routine a lot more, and I also read a couple of graphic novels, so that's the reason my numbers have jumped from like 13 books to 18. So the first book I'm going to talk about is actually a reread, and I listened to it as an audiobook this time around, and that is The Disaster Artist by Greg Sestero. This, if you don't know, is basically the story behind the movie The Room, and if you don't know what The Room is, watch it now because it's truly an experience. But The Room is basically a movie that was made by this insane man called Tommy Wiseau, and it's a complete vanity project, and it is the worst movie that's ever been made, but it's so funny to watch. It's like a really enjoyable experience to watch this movie because of how bad it is, and more importantly how insane it is in its badness. So that's the movie, and this is written by one of the actors who stars in the movie, who was Tommy Wiseau's best friend, and this is his story of filming The Room and also his friendship with Tommy Wiseau, and it's just an absolutely fascinating account of basically this very strange man, and it's really beautiful. It's very funny, it's very scary and worrying, and it's also very sad in parts. Poignant's probably a better word. It's not very sad, but it's very poignant. But I really enjoyed listening to the audiobook because it is narrated by Greg Sestero, and he does a fantastic Tommy Wiseau impression. If you don't know, Tommy Wiseau has a very peculiar accent, and he refuses to say where he's from. And one of the mysteries of Tommy Wiseau is he basically gives no details about his life ever, including his age. No one knows how old he really is or anything, and he has like insane amounts of money, but no one knows how he got it. So just this insight into parts of Tommy Wiseau's life is fascinating, and Greg Sestero's life as well is really interesting, hearing about his acting career and stuff, and how The Room, just the process of filming The Room. But yeah, if you have seen The Room, if you enjoy watching The Room, I definitely recommend checking out this book. It adds a whole other layer to the insanity that is that movie. And I would recommend the audiobook as well. I really enjoyed listening to it. The next book was the final 5-star read of the month, and it was the only fiction 5-star read, which I do give out very rarely, and that was Radio Silence by Alice Oseman. I adore this book. I talked about it recently in a video, so I'm not going to go on about it for ages. I think actually it'll be uploaded after this one, but it's my mid-year freakout tag. But this book is just beautiful. It is a contemporary young adult book about a girl who's in 6th form called Frances, and she's a classic overachiever. She's worked her whole life to try and get into Oxford or Cambridge. I forget which one, I think it's Oxford. And she basically realises that she's got this persona at school and none of her friends know who she really is. And then she makes this male friend called Alid who she can be herself around, and there's no romance in this. There is a 100% platonic male-female friendship, and it's beautiful, and there's also this podcast element. So Alid creates this podcast and Francis is like the biggest fan for the podcast, and they kind of bond over that, and it's just a beautiful, beautiful story. This book got 5 stars because it means so much to me personally. I relate a lot to how I was in school, and there's also a lot of representation in here. There is mentions of demisexuality, which basically never happens in books. But yeah, this is an absolutely beautiful book. If the synopsis doesn't appeal to you, I'm not going to tell you to read it. But I think this would resonate with a lot of bookish type people because of the nature of Francis. And yeah, it's going to mean a lot to me. It's one of my new favourites, definitely. So any book that had to follow radio silence was going to have a tough act to follow, but alas, this book was also really bad, and that is Frankissstein by Jeanette Winterson. I have a blog post where I'm going to go into detail about this, so read that if you want more detail than I'm going to give you now. But essentially this is a kind of retelling of Frankenstein using AI as the concept for the monster. So someone's trying to create AI so no one needs bodies. Our main character is a trans man. And that's really where the problems start, because the trans rep in this is really bad. It's our protagonist is continuous, like, so he identifies as a trans man, but then he says that he's not a real man, and he's also still a woman, and he's a hybrid. And that's like the first problem, because I don't know if she was trying to go for gender fluidity, but if she did it really badly, because the character identifies as a trans man. So it doesn't come across as someone who's gender fluid, it comes across as the author not understanding what being a trans man is. And I'm not saying I do, because I am obviously not a trans man, but I have trans friends. Before writing my review of this, I did discuss it with several of my close friends to check that where I was coming from was reasonable, and they all agreed with me. The other main problem is that so the main character is dating Dr. Frankissstein, Dr. Victor, and he fetishizes the trans man character quite a lot. Specifically, the genital aspect is discussed in a lot of detail, and it just made me really uncomfortable to read. And also, Victor basically says that the reason he's attracted to the protagonist is because he's a hybrid, and it's just a whole level of gross, unfortunate implications surrounding that. Putting the transphobia to one side, I also thought this book was really dull. It's very literary in the way it's written, and I did read an excerpt of it before I requested the ARC, and I really liked that excerpt. I thought it was really interesting, and this book had such a strong concept that it could have run with. But alas, I technically DNF'd this. I got to 80% and nothing had happened yet, so then I skim read the rest, and as far as I can tell, nothing happens at all in this book. The more I thought about this book, the angrier it made me, because I actually love the idea of doing a retelling of Frankenstein, using AI as the idea of the monster. That's a really clever concept. One of the things is that Victor says with the if we all become AI, none of us will have any bodies, so gender will be meaningless. And like that could be linked to gender fluidity really well, but then you just throw a spanner in the works by having this whole trans main character being described in inappropriate ways. And yeah, anyway, I'm going to stop ranting about this book, but I really did not like it at all. I've seen basically nothing but positive reviews on Goodreads, and I'm expecting that to change as more people read the book. But yeah, this was a real disappointment. The next book I read was kind of a disappointment on a much smaller scale, and that is Meddling Kids by Edgar Cantero. If you know this channel, you know I've been trying to read this since basically I started my channel, which was last October. And I've just been putting it off for reasons I don't understand, and I finally got around to reading it. I gave it 4 stars. This is a horror book that is literally basically about the Scooby-Doo gang, except they've all got different names because copyright. And they solved a case, and it's set about 10 years after that case, maybe longer. And the person they convicted for that case has just come out of prison. But something weird happened when he was arrested, and they have weird memories from their childhood of when they were investigating this case. So they decide to go back and find out the truth of what happened there. And this is not a spoiler, but the truth is like eldritch horror. That's made clear pretty early on. So I don't like eldritch horror, and I think that was my main problem with this book. It started off so strong. I really loved the start. It's got a great female-female relationship in here. It's got some really good characterization. And then I think about halfway through the book, the characterization kind of stops in favour of the plot. And I don't really know how to explain it, but I lost a lot of interest after that, and I still really enjoyed it. Like I said, it was 4 stars. It was still a really good read. If you like eldritch horror, you'll probably love this a lot more than I did, but it's not my kind of horror. And I think because the characterization was so strong at the start, and then it kind of just went away at the end or halfway through, it was just a disappointment because the book I was enjoying so much felt like it changed a little bit. But this is still a really good horror book. It's pretty funny. It's got great references to Scooby-Doo throughout. The characterization, like I said, is really good at the start, and the plot is fairly decent. It was like eldritchy, but I could follow it really well, which is one of my problems with eldritch horror, is that I don't like when it gets all convoluted and you can't really tell what's actually happening. That doesn't happen in this book. So yeah, I did really enjoy this. I thought it was going to be a higher read than it was. I was hoping I might give this 5 stars, but it was still really solid, and I did really enjoy it. It's just my expectations were so high. The next book was another arc, and that was Never Have I Ever by Joshilyn Jackson. I can't say that properly, I don't know why. I can't remember when this comes out, so I'll put that and the release date for Frankissstein down below in the description, because I'm terrible at remembering when arcs come out. But this is a thriller, and this was a 3.5 star read for me. So this is about a woman who is part of a book club, and then one night at this book club, this new person who's just moved to town comes to the book club, and she suggests they play this game, which is supposed to be like Never Have I Ever, but it's really nothing to do with Never Have I Ever. And then they play this game, and it becomes apparent that this woman knows a secret from the main character's past. So that is the blurb of the book. I'm going to tell you a little bit more because I think that blurb's slightly misleading. So you do find out what the secret from the past is almost immediately. It's not a thriller driven by you trying to work out what has happened in our main character's past. You get told that almost immediately. As with Frankissstein, I also have a blog post with this, so again, more detailed thoughts will be down below if you want to read that. But basically, the first half of this thriller was kind of dull for me. I almost DNF'd it actually at literally 50% because it seemed afraid to create suspense. So you would find out everything almost immediately. There was nothing that was kind of a mystery driving the book. And I thought it was a really odd choice because it is meant to be a thriller and it felt like there were no thrills. And then almost 50% of the way through, something happens that I did not see coming. And that flipped the entire book around. And it was really good to me after that. I'm not going to say what it is, obviously. But this book surprised me multiple times. And in a way that actually makes sense, which is good, because normally when thrillers surprise me, it's because they're doing something that doesn't make any sense that I'm going to hate. So that was a pleasant surprise. So the second half of this book was really great. The first half is quite dull. Sorry for the camera angle changing, my phone just died. But anyway, so there is something in this book that I feel I need to give a trigger warning for. But it is a big spoiler, so I'm not going to give it in the video. But if you're the kind of person who needs trigger warnings, or you're concerned about certain content, click on my blog post and it is in the tags for the blog post what this book has. But yeah, so anyway, overall, as a thriller, I didn't know how to rate this because the second half was so good and the first half was so dull, so I did give it 3.5 stars. But yeah, it was a decent thriller if you can get through the first half. The next book I read was also a thriller, and that was The Marriage Lie by Kimberley Belle. I gave this 3 out of 5 stars. It was an alright thriller. It's basically about this woman whose husband dies in a plane crash, but he's not on the plane he was meant to be on, and she realises that he's been keeping all the secrets from her, and she's trying to find out basically who he was and what's actually happened and how much of their relationship was real. It started off well. It's very short and it's okay. I think more that maybe it shows poorly because the premise was just kind of meh to me. It's got a lot of mourning in it, which I should have expected, but I didn't. And I find that kind of thing very tough to read about. But there just wasn't many surprises in this thriller. It does the thing where there's only really 2 suspects, so you can't really be surprised by who's behind it in the end. And like, stuff did happen, but I wasn't enthralled. It's an okay book. There's nothing wrong with it, and it was pretty well written. It was just, something was lacking, I don't know what. The next book I read was also an audiobook. I'm not rating it, and that's because it's Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. I can't rate Harry Potter. You know, what would I give it? Am I going to give them all 5 stars? No. But this is the first time I've ever listened to the audiobook. I've been wanting to reread Harry Potter all year. In fact, I did a page in my bullet journal specifically for Harry Potter, and I was putting off for the rereads because I've got so much to read. And then the Time Turner Book Club, I found out, who's hosted by a lovely person called Anna, who I get on really well with. I found out they were rereading Harry Potter, so it was like the perfect time for me to join in, and my library had the audiobook available, so I was like, oh cool, I'll do the audiobook, then it won't interfere with the other stuff I'm reading, because I don't listen to audiobooks when I would be reading physical books. But yeah, it was so nice to listen to the audiobook. It was a little off-putting because Stephen Fry says like Malfoy rather than Malfoy. You might not hear the difference between those, but it's apparent to me when I listen to it. But apart from that, I loved it. It was a great experience. I love Harry Potter. I'm going to continue rereading them. There's not much to say about the first one really. It's just a nice simple story. I might write some blog posts or something when I get onto the later books to kind of dissect them in more detail. But with the earlier ones, it's just a nice nostalgia trip. So yeah, that was a lovely experience. And the final book I read was an ARC, and I finished it right on the last day of June, and that is The Best Horror of the Year, which is an anthology edited by Ellen Datlow. I've read a couple of Ellen Datlow's anthologies now, and they're always kind of hit and miss for me. So this one got 3.5 stars, which is about, I think, what I've rated all of them maybe. This has got so many stories in it. It's got a lot of stories, and as with usual anthologies, there is a couple I really didn't like, and there's a couple I really did like. So I haven't finished at the time of filming, but hopefully it'll be up later today, maybe by the time I upload this. But I'm going to do a blog post. I'm going to go through every single story in detail. I've started doing that. So just as a quick overview, some of the stories I really liked. There was one by Joe Hill that was fantastic. It wasn't quite a horror story, but it was just so well written. It was really good. That was about a plane full of people, and the plane has like something starts going wrong, and it swaps to each passenger in the story, and you learn about that passenger, and that was just fantastically done. Another really good story, which I actually read in a different anthology before. The way they get these stories is they collect them from all the anthologies throughout the year. So you might have, if you read a lot of anthologies, you might have read them before. But that was Shit Happens by Michael Marshall Smith. That's a really fun story about a guy who goes to a business meeting, and then like a disease starts striking people down, and he's got to escape this business meeting. There were more stories I liked than I didn't like, which was quite good actually. For for this type of anthology. But a lot of the ones I didn't like came at the start, so it kind of felt like it was going to be terrible. And then all the good ones hit and it was alright. So yeah, I'm going to give it 3.5 stars, but do look at the blog post. I highly recommend it because I've got actually like numbers of how many I liked versus how many I didn't like and all that stuff. Yeah, so that is all of the books that I read in June. I hope you had a really good reading month. Do let me know if you read any books that were particularly good or bad, or if you read any of these books, what you thought of them. And thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give me a thumbs up. It helps me out massively. And I hope to see you next time.